Just the other day, a young man in his 20s asked me, you think there's still stigma with those who are living with HIV? And I said, most definitely. Because those living with HIV often ask themselves, what will someone think of me when they find out that I'm living with HIV? Now, this question was prefaced when he confessed to me that a friend of his who was living with HIV offered him a drink from his soda. And my mid-20s friend, in his mind, said, I don't want to drink from this straw. That kind of thought is still going around, even though we live in the 21st century. How can we address the stigma, the fear, the doubt, the misinformation of how HIV is communicated? You know, the body.org, which is one of the leading websites on HIV resources, asked this question. Does religion pose? Does religion pose as a stumbling block when it comes to HIV and AIDS? Most definitely. Because oftentimes it's not talked about unless it's talked about in context. And what does that mean? World AIDS Day. Many churches dust it off and they talk about it once a year. Or unless they have to deal with it because someone has died. But even when someone has died as a result of HIV or AIDS, their death certificate won't mention cause of death, AIDS. Cause of death is pneumonia. Cause of death is cancer. Cause of death is a wide range of other opportunistic diseases, but not AIDS. As a fully inclusive community that we are, it's our responsibility, HIV negative and HIV positive alike, to bring to the forefront, to the conscious awareness, the reality of the world we live in. But if we're not supplied with the tools to do so, how are we going to do so? If we're afraid of offending someone by our words or lack of knowledge, how are we ever going to talk about it? I have to remind you, there was a time that I was HIV negative. There was a time. I have vague memories of that time, but there was a time. And so you could say that I have a perspective of both. Even though my HIV negative times weren't all that conducive to positive living. I was looking for love in all the wrong places. And as a result, I am living the consequences of what I am living now. But I've said it once before and I say it again. I choose not to dwell in the consequences of my past, but I choose to live in the present of who I am now and how I, along with you, my family, can be a living testimony of hope for those who are still living with HIV and those who are living with HIV negativeness.
All right.
Because someone who does not yet know what it is to seroconvert, we don't want them to find out the hard way. A friend of mine who took ill last week with flu-like symptoms just found out this year, a year later, that he's living with HIV. I went to go see him. He is completely emaciated. And I tried to assimilate the fear in my own face. And all he said was, people say I look thinner. I said, well, at least you lost all that excess weight. Words were not helpful. Thank you, Reverend Alex. Thank you for nothing. You know, our faith allows us to be equipped with the very tools to break down the barriers.
That's right.
So that we can put the fear aside, the doubt aside. One of the reasons that we miscommunicate and misrepresent is for fear of offending people. We rather be politically correct rather than be politically incorrect for fear of offending. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. If you don't understand something, ask me. I'd rather be offended and teach rather than be offended and have you walk away the same way you walked in. And there are tons of churches around us that live by that theology model. They want to keep you blind, unable to hear the truth, and unwilling to speak the truth. A few weeks ago, we presented a Spanish language play here, about 2 weeks ago, that was subtitled in English. It was called Conocida, which refers to known. It was in your face, up front, talking about the dynamics of the family system, however we perceive that. That oftentimes what is known is not talked about. Because if the world around us doesn't perceive it, no one's gonna know. But you know what? In the real world, it's happening. We prefer to maintain and contain ourselves in that very comfortable bubble. And we live by the very fear that someone's gonna burst that bubble and all our truths are gonna pour right out. And if we're not willing to speak the truth in this sacred space, then that sacred space becomes tainted. It becomes a misrepresentation of our own false perception of who we are. This church tries to equip you with the tools for daily living so you could go out and be the mentors that you are called to be. For someone else who is seeking hope, clarity, and understanding. That doesn't mean we have to push them. They have to arrive here by their own free will. They have to be at their moment in time and space. I remember when I arrived at this church at the ripe young age of 19 years old.
That's right.
The club scene had more power over me than this church. I'd come to church and weep my eyes out. I'd come for a few weeks and then leave. Peer pressure was strong. I'd come back when I had fallen and was needing a spiritual guidance. I'd leave again when I felt I was strong enough. It wasn't until 10 years, my mid-20s, that I realized what I am learning here in this faith community is allowing me to be prepared. Not only to handle and battle what's out there, but to equip those who are journeying with me. My partner and I are more better equipped today because we have allowed ourselves to be expression of that hope. It's building that solid foundation that is built on rock and not on sand. And even though that foundation may shake, it's not gonna break. HIV, AIDS, a human issue. Bro, we can grab the tools to break down the misinformation, the false hope. How many of you here remember the study that came out last year from the Swedish government that if your viral load was undetectable, for those of you who don't know, the viral load is in layman's term, is how much virus you have in your system. And your T cells are up high, which are the T cells which help you remain healthy, which fights off the infection. If your viral load was undetectable and your T cells were up high, you could have intimate relations, intimate sex, without a condom. How many of you remember that? A few. Those who were willing to read that study, let me tell you, it was a pretty boring study. Page after page after page. When you were